All right. If you can see and hear me, that's great. And I want you to just type in the chat real quick if the volume is okay and all that, so I can understand.
Everything sounds great from my end. Looks
all right.
great.
Excellent. Excellent. The one thing, if there's one thing that you get out of this next presentation, just one, it is to understand that your 10 acres and a dream is dependent on you understanding your why. And I think that is so important, because the reality is that when we get more snow than average, we get 120 inches of snow and the machines are breaking and I can't keep up with the plowing, and a tree falls across the road, you are going to question your 10 acres and a dream. Okay? I mean, in fact, I'm willing to bet that all of you could probably type in, because most of you already own land. I think it was about 20% that didn't, could probably type in and go, yep, I understand that completely. But having a strong why is critical to you realizing your 10 acres and a dream, whatever that is. Okay, for me, it's homesteading, and I feel very strongly about that, and I think you do too. In fact, it was like 70 or 80% felt you either agreed or strongly agreed with wanting to grow the majority of your own food. That's huge. That's massive. It's also very challenging, but we'll talk about some of those things throughout this presentation. All right, so I said it once again, my name is Sean, and I live out here on this homestead. We are between Sandpoint and Coeur d'Alene. We are at 47 degrees north latitude. We're at 2,700 feet as our actual home site that you can see there on the screen. And our property ranges from about 2,500 feet all the way up to 2,800 feet. And we are on an easterly slope, meaning we slope down to the east. We have a cedar and a hemlock habitat type, depending on where you are on the property. And the reason I tell you those things is it's very helpful to understand your property, okay, to really understand it, because what it leads to is that what are the things that you can do on that property? What are the things that you can do where you're working with nature, not against it? Because we can take two approaches. We can go, okay, what does this property want to do? Or here's what I want to do, and I'm going to try and make the property do it. Now, I'm not against doing some things like microclimate modification, and we do that here. We have hoop houses and cold frames. We're in the process of building a cold climate greenhouse, etc. Okay, so we're doing all those things, and I think those things are completely doable. But I want to share with you then is, let me advance the slide. Okay, there we go. Now I'm all squared away. I want to share with you a little bit of our inspiration, because I think it's so important that you define what inspires you, and that will lead to why you're doing what you're doing, which will ultimately lead to your success. I truly believe that. So you can see the screen here, and I've got three things here, and there's many things that inspire me, but these are three things that do inspire me, and not just inspire me like I feel good about this, I really like this, in how we actually approach homesteading. Okay, how we approach our 10 acres and a dream. And on the top there, you have Lewis and Clark. And Lewis and Clark, to me, are like, they're my heroes. I love reading about them. I love the history of it. But one of the things that I really like about them is that they were the ultimate, what I call the ultimate generalists. They were able to do so many different things. Not that they were necessarily absolute experts in any one of those things, but they were able to do a lot of things. Okay, they understood foraging and wildcrafting. They understood hunting and trapping. They were able to distill seawater and get salt, and understood how to preserve food. They knew how to navigate. They knew how to survey. And really importantly, they knew how to interact with the natives and work with them, not against them. Okay, this is really, really important. It kind of leads into this whole successful rural living. Okay, so I really like that. In the lower left, you have Walden, and you have Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden, Life in the Woods, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but basically what he says is he went out there to live deliberately and to face the essential facts of life so that he could learn what it had to teach him. Okay, that has impacted us and myself on why we homestead. I came out here to homestead to live deliberately. All right, and then the final thing there is that it's tree crops, and that's a book. It's an excellent book. You should read it. And it was written by J. Russell Smith in the 1920s. It was originally published in the 1920s. And it's an excellent book about agriculture. And this was really the precursor to what is known now as permaculture, right? So the book right there, the title, the subtitle says Tree Crops, a Permanent Agriculture, right? And that's where permaculture gets a lot of its influence from. Okay, it's highly perennialized system. And so he outlines and goes through all these different tree crops and to show how native peoples have used them successfully to live sustainably for literally thousands of years. And one of the best descriptions that he provides in that book is of the island of France called Corsica. And that description that he uses, I mean, it impacted me greatly. Okay, and it was, the gist is this, is that in Corsica, they built stone houses that lasted for 1,000 years. They built stone fences that lasted for hundreds of years. They had chestnut orchards where they would harvest crops in the fall and use those chestnuts how we would use things like wheat or rice or corn. Okay, they would run their animals through the chestnut orchards during the growing season. So sheep and goats would graze in the understory. And then, like I said, they would harvest the nuts in the fall, and then they'd bring in pigs after that to clean up all of the chestnuts below. That has influenced me greatly on how I homestead. Okay, so let's get going here. We've got this, I'm showing you right now our homestead design, and planning and designing is an integral part of a successful 10 acres and a dream. And I'm going to give you some tools today, but again, remember, all those tools do nothing but support you understanding your need for a very, very strong why. Okay, so the one thing I want to share with you is that we've been very successful out here on our 40-acre homestead. In fact, we are millionaires. Okay, we're millionaires. We're killing it. We're absolutely crushing it, right? So we're growing over 1 million calories on our own property. No, I'm not talking about dollars, calories. In fact, we're up to about 1.5 million calories. Now, we do track these things, and this is an important part of planning. And you don't have to do it down to that degree, but having some level of knowledge of what you're doing and what you're trying to do, more importantly. You guys answered this survey question, and the vast majority, you said you wanted to grow the majority of your own food. This is how you get there. Okay, we do. Now, we're not growing all of our own food. We're not. In fact, I am an advocate of a very, very robust level of self-sufficiency with some interdependency, interdependency upon your family, your friends, your network, your community, your local area, your regional area, and then national and international. I think we've got our pyramid exactly wrong on where we get our food from. Okay, so the majority of our food comes from a pyramid, is from international and national. The average food mile is 1,500 miles. Okay, that's the average food mile. On top of that is regional. You might think of that as something like within 300 miles or something, 300 to 400 miles. On top of that is local. It gets this small sliver. And then on top of that, on average, is a very, very tiny sliver of people growing their own food. I think that needs to be flipped. I really do. I feel strongly about that. I felt strongly about that for a long time. And I think people right now are realizing that that is the way we need to go if we want resiliency in our food systems, in our essential systems. We do, as I mentioned just briefly before, we have our 40-acre homestead, and we do a little bit of silvopasture. We're doing a little bit of experimental forest farming. So on the left there in that red area, so we've got 3 paddocks. I'm just going to use this as an example. It's just 1 acre, 3 paddocks. It's thinned down all the way down to about maybe 100 trees total in that whole acre. Plus it has a small pen. And what we do is we rotate pigs through there, and in order to manage the disturbance. We don't want them to sit in one area too long and kind of destroy the trees or destroy the understory and all that kind of stuff. We have stumps in there, we have shrubs in there, we do have understory grasses in there, and we also have planted several food-bearing trees that eventually, going back to tree crops, will drop food so that those pigs can graze as needed. So things like mulberry, we've got apple in there, we've got some, let's see, bunch of apple, bunch of mulberry, trying to get some chestnut growing in there, and a few other things like that, right? So we're trying to create this very sustainable, long-term type system. We have edible forest gardens that kind of double as poultry yards, and we grow a lot of different things in this edible forest garden. This one is only about 1/3 of an acre or so. We have perennial and annual gardens. Again, you can see everything we do, we integrate animals into our system as much as we can. And what we do is we manage that disturbance. Now you're going to get a detailed class on silvopasture by Tess Hahn, and I believe that is in the 3rd. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's in the 3rd session. Okay, and she's going to go into more detail on silvopasture, which is excellent. So you don't miss that. So again, we integrate animals into all of our systems. My wife is a clinical herbalist, and so we have culinary and medicinal gardens. And so it's just yesterday, I shot a video for YouTube on harvesting dandelion. And I took some dandelion, and I took plantain, and I took stinging nettle, and I sauteed it all up, and I put some of our duck eggs in it, and made a nice, mostly wild foods dish, and it was excellent. And so we also do a lot of foraging and wildcrafting, but we do a lot of cultivation as well. Today, I'm going to hit the highlights of these things. Again, I reemphasize that you understanding your why is the most important thing you can get out of today. If you understand that, you're crystal clear on that, then all of these things will just support what you're trying to do. Okay, so we're going to cover the 4 attributes very quickly. We'll talk about a few principles as it comes to approaching planning. We'll hit a little bit of planning process, and if I have time, we'll hit some of these principles that we follow that I've gotten from all those inspirational areas that I've talked about, and to include dozens of others as well. Okay, so here we go. The first thing, though, you need to understand is the expectation. Okay, you can see Buzz Light here. He's awesome. I need you to think of your 10 acres in a dream, and I need you to imagine it. I mean, do the visualization. You sit down, you think about it, and you go, it's pastoral. It is beautiful. It always works out well, but sometimes it turns out like this, right? So I'm joking a little bit with you, but we have to understand that there's a difference between what we want and expect and what is reality. And it takes a long time to get to that reality of what, or it takes a long time to get to what we're expecting, okay, and building. So don't get discouraged by it. Remember your why, and it'll get you through all of the nailed it sessions, right? So we have more expectation, but here's reality. We have this lovely pastoral, beautiful landscape, but you know what? Sometimes it looks like that. We're happy, always happy, right? Sometimes we're walking in that. And then here's one. I want you to type in, if you've ever done this, is it, here's a livestock trailer where we move goats and sheep, but if you've done this, I'd like to know about it. I want you to type into the chat if you've ever moved livestock in a car, a minivan, the back of a pickup truck. I bet you a lot of you have. I bet you a lot of you have. All right, accountability, the 4 attributes. This is really crucial. You're responsible. You take full responsibility for your 10 acres in a dream and homestead. And this is different from as far as utilizing resources and getting help. I'm a huge fan of that. And in fact, you'll see here in a little while how that works. However, you are responsible. If you take personal responsibility for it, you're going to go farther. And this is really what's key and what's driving us to being able to realize our 10 acres in a dream. Commitment. Why, you got to ask the other question. Why do people quit? because, you know, let's be honest, every one of these panelists knows, and probably all of you in the audience know people who have come out to the land, they've had grand dreams, and within a couple of years they've been gone. Okay, there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, some of those are, you know, I joked about the difference between expectation and reality. Well, some people have a hard time with that, and it's why I joke about it a little bit. Okay, so you can have an expectation, you can have a dream, but understand that reality, there's going to be a gap there, at least for a time. Some people get mired in perfectionism. Okay, they get analysis paralysis. Okay, they got to have all the information before they can act. Okay, that is not my approach. That is not my approach. Now, I'm not advocating being reckless and irresponsible, but I am advocating taking massive action. That's what I'm advocating, is that you get some information and start. That's what you do. Okay, and then, you know, there's all kinds of other reasons why people want to quit, but let's talk about commitment. Okay, one of the first things that you need to do is that you need to decide if you're interested or committed. And that sounds kind of weird, but it's true. How many of us have wanted to say lose weight or get into better shape? And we've said, yeah, I want to get in better shape. I want to lose weight. But how many of us have failed at that, right? And underlying all of that is the fact that we were really just interested in losing weight or getting healthy. We were not committed to it. You need to not be interested in your 10 acres and a dream. You need to be committed to your 10 acres and a dream. Systems trump will. I love this because it's true. I use that same example of wanting to lose weight. And if you say, okay, well, I'm going to work out every day and I'm going to do intermittent fasting and I'm going to eat very healthy, and that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to, you know, drink my green smoothie every day. Okay. Well, if you rely on your willpower to do that, it's likely that it's not going to go well. Okay. But if you have a system to do that, if your system is, I wake up in the morning, I go to the bathroom, I come over here and I drink, you know, 20 ounces of water. That's my routine, my routine in the morning. And then you have another routine, and then that gets you along the way. Okay, so that's a system that you can get into the habit of doing that will trump willpower. Our willpower is not very good. Okay, that's just the truth. All right, so a commitment. Here's where you can leverage some really good things. Okay, and they're what I call your community of interest, your network, and you're in a mastermind group. And you don't have to use those terms, okay? But a mastermind group can simply be you and two other people, two other families that you get together, and you're like, you both have a very similar path, maybe slightly different dreams, but a similar path. And you guys get together once a week, once a month, and you share, hey, these are the things I'm working on. This is what we're trying to do. And you can help hold each other accountable, okay? So it feeds into the accountability and the commitment. You can also physically assist one another. One Saturday, maybe all three families go to one property, they work on a project. Maybe the next Saturday they go to another property and work on that project, and on and on. Okay, there's ways to leverage that, and it's very powerful if you can find, call it a mastermind group, call it a homesteading group, and all of that. Okay, so beyond that is the network. Okay, that's a little bit more broad, but it's people that you know personally. This is not just an ethereal, local, or community. This is network where you have established relationships. Okay, you know your farmer, you know your dairyman, where you get milk from, you know where you get your seeds and shrubs and people who are propagating plants from. You know who is the breeder of the sheep that you get, and on and on. Okay, that's your network. And then beyond that is your community of interest. This is where what you're doing today. Okay, this is the groups. This could be online groups. This could be broader forums and that kind of thing where you can collaborate and share ideas. Okay, now we get to goals. This is really important. Again, so we have our big why. We know we need to be we know we have to hold ourselves accountable, and we know it's smart to get other people and help them to help us be accountable. We know we got to be committed, and now you need written goals. And the reality is there's those who do it and there's those who don't. And those who do it generally accomplish more than those who don't. Same capabilities, same knowledge and skills. It's those who write things down and have goals, they generally will accomplish more. I like to use SMART goals, and I like to use SMART W. Okay, so I add a W to the end of that. And that's, as you can see there, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, timely, and then beyond that is why. Okay, why? So you can have a really good goal. And I'm going to get to an example here so you'll see how that works out. Okay, so written goals, you need to have them. And then the fourth attribute of someone who is going to be successful in 10 acres in a dream is somebody who does planning. Okay, and this, I get blank stare sometimes when I start talking about planning, but it is really important. It is a skill to be developed. If you don't really know how to plan, that's okay. There's so many resources on how to get started in planning, to include several things that we're going to talk about today. All right, so it's a skill to be developed. It is not a template to be filled out. A template to be filled out is not a bad starting point, and it's good for certain things, but it is ineffective if that's all it is. If you fill out a template of a plan and then set that plan aside and never look at that plan, it's not a plan. It's something you did maybe for some reason, but it wasn't for planning. It was, I think it was Eisenhower who said, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. Okay, so planning, going through that planning process is indispensable. And I 100% believe it and know it to be true. Okay, some approaches to planning. We've talked about systems over will, so I'm going to cover some highlights here. Systems over will. And again, these principles are more important than hey, this is step one, this is step two. These principles are more important than that. Okay, but templates are okay. But again, you have to apply the deeper thinking onto the templates. You need to think through those things, right? We've talked about a lot of this. Okay, so systems over will, and when we have routines, when we have these planning templates, as long as we're thinking through them, they can guard against decision fatigue. And to the next bullet, it says deep work versus shallow work, also an excellent book. Not so much about homesteading, but about doing deep work or doing very thoughtful, deep work. Okay, so planning is sitting down in deep work. And here's an example. A lot of mistakes that I see in people homesteading, because I work with people in homesteading, is that they will go back and forth. Since they don't have a plan, they have to constantly go back and forth between what I call CEO time and worker time. Okay, CEO time and worker time. So in other words, 1 minute you're digging a hole trying to plant a tree, and then you got to stop and go, is this the best place for this tree? Is it in 5 years when it's canopied out, is it going to shade out certain things? And what's the solar aspect right here? And what's the soil like? Am I doing the right thing here? Am I taking the right approach? You see what I'm saying? So we want to have our CEO time. Or another example is that people, and I'm guilty of this too, planning a project. Okay, so planning a project is you sit down and you determine the business case, and you get your goals and your objectives and the criteria and the requirements, and you go through all this stuff. You create your Gantt charts, or maybe you're standing in an aisle in Home Depot planning the project right then and there, right? You're coming up with the materials list. How am I going to do this? You're thinking through it. Not the best approach. I'm pretty sure we've all done it, but not the best approach. Okay, so I'm encouraging you to learn planning as a skill. Okay, learn it as a skill. All right, effectiveness over efficiency. Okay, effectiveness over efficiency. This is really important. I talk about down here. It says, okay, I did 40 things. I'm really, really busy. I did 48 things on my to-do list, but I just can't get ahead. Right? In a lot of cases, what you're doing is you're doing a lot of things. You're doing a lot of things, but are you doing the right things? Okay, effectiveness is doing the right things that are nested within your dream and why and goals and objectives. And doing a lot of things aren't necessarily helping that along. You can be very busy, but busy doing the wrong things. Okay, so again, I go back to the CEO time versus the worker time. You need to sit down and do the planning and determine what is most effective here. Even if it's at the expense of some efficiency. Okay, I mean, let's just be honest right here. Is it, if you're talking about money only, okay, money only, what is the best approach if we're talking money only to buying your own food, right? I think that you guys all know the answer, although today in our current time is showing the fractures of just-in-time inventory in our commercial system. But if we're going to simply make decisions about money, we would say, well, the most efficient and the cheapest way to do it is to go to the grocery store and buy our food. Is that most effective, though, for your goals and objectives? And obviously it's not, because the vast majority of you want to grow all of your own food. Okay. All right. So be effective, hopefully both, right? Effective and efficient, but be effective over efficient. We get into the strategic planning. Let me just, I'm going to stop here and see, like, do we want to stop at all and see any questions? Let's just see real quick. Do we have any questions so far? All right.
Hi, Sean. We do have one question. It was from a little bit earlier in your presentation,
okay,
when you were referring to the different zones, like number 2 and number 4. You might be getting back to that a little bit later in your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a great question. Now, that is a methodology specific to permaculture, where things are broken down into zones. So zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and depending on who you read, there might be a 5 and there might be a 0. But generally speaking, 1 through 4 or 5, with the lower number being the more intensive area. So in other words, the Culinary and Medicinal herb garden is a zone 1 area. A nursery out on your back deck and growing some greens right there is a zone 1 area, and on and on and on. And so you would base that on the intensiveness of it, and then also maybe the amount of times that you visit that by day. But if you're interested more deeply in that, I recommend that you get into permaculture. So you look at permaculture. In fact, hopefully you can see this. Here's a great book called Gaia's Garden. It's not a bad place to start when it comes to permaculture, if you're interested in that. Okay, and if you have any follow-up questions to that, just let me know. But if we look at strategic planning, you know, you might think to yourself, look, this is like, that's big corporations, that's government. I think it's very valuable for a homesteader or somebody who's sitting down to do 10 acres and a dream to do this. It's just to sit down. It doesn't have to be extensive. It doesn't have to cost a bunch of money, and it doesn't have to take weeks of time, but you're kind of just walking through this process of strategic planning. And the first one is, and I've already alluded to it many times, dreams and vision, right? This is what your dream, this is called 10 acres and a dream. And then what's your vision? How are you going to make that dream actually a reality, right? And a big part of that is your why of your dream and your vision. And one way that I would recommend as a tool or a technique that you can do is benchmark. If you're not really sure what you want to do or what you can do on your property, benchmark. In other words, find other people that are doing similar things to what you want to do and go see what they're doing. Okay, and in the ideal, it would be kind of the same type of climate and the same type of situation that you're in, you know, closely, right? It doesn't have to be exact, but, you know, visit, tour homesteads, farms, other things that you want to do, and then you can benchmark those. It's like, I like that, and I like that. I like the way they're doing that over there. Not everybody is going to want to do it how we do it. They might want to do it in a different way. Okay, and so benchmarking is a good way to do that. And then I mentioned on here is don't get analysis paralysis. Develop a dream, a vision. You can jot it down, write it down. and just don't get paralyzed by it. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you can always revisit this and change it up. And there's one thing that's for sure, is that your dream and vision on your property will change over time. Okay, it will. It absolutely will. And if you need a little more help, there's 3 good questions to ask yourself. Am I doing what's important to me? Am I doing what I'm good at? And am I doing what I like to do? Okay, and if you can answer yes to those questions, you're probably on the right track. All right, so the next step, okay, after dreams and visioning, is situational awareness. This is where you take stock of your situation. This is where you size up the situation. And you can do it in many different ways. One of the key themes that I recommend that you keep in mind is that you look and observe your area, which is another awesome lesson that I learned from Henry David Thoreau, by the way, and also in a Sam County Almanac, another excellent book, as was mentioned before, is their ability to observe is priceless. Okay, observation. And again, this is tempered. Don't observe for so long that you're paralyzed, but observe. Continue. It's continuous. So observe, act. Observe, act. And I really believe that. Okay, so you're going to look at what works in your area. How can I work with nature, not against? Okay, again, doesn't mean you can't do experimentation with certain things. That's all good. And we're doing a lot of that here as well. But for the bulk of it, I'm working with things that do well in this climate or in a climate analog, which is a similar climate that's somewhere else in the world, in elevation, precipitation, in temperature, and it's inland from a large ocean, things like that. Similar places in the world, you can go, hey, over there, in a similar climate, they can grow these things. I'm going to try that here. Okay, so that's a good way to approach this. And then, there's other ways of doing this, and these are not bad ways to do it. But if you're interested in things like small farmstead enterprises, you need to look at some of these things as well, right? Is there even a market for what you're wanting to do in your area? Is it legal, or what are the hurdles to doing it? Okay, all those things need to be considered. All right, so moving on is what I call themes. Again, we're on the strategic planning, right? So I told you goal setting is really important. And what we're looking at right here is themes and milestones. And this is like really, really important. I'm really gonna do it by giving you 2 examples. And then the first one is, you can probably see my cursor, hopefully. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see it says building water resiliency. Okay, that's a theme. I want to build water resiliency. I want the soil to be able to hold more moisture. I want to create some ponds, and maybe I want to put in some check dams, as long as you're going within all of the local regulations and laws. I want to do this so I can slow, spread, and soak water. Okay, I want to do rainwater catchment on our property. And by the way, we do all of those things, or we attempt to do all of those things. But that's a theme. And then we have milestones underneath that. Okay, milestones that's where we start getting into this SMART W. Okay, so I look here, I go, I want to build water resiliency. Then I'd ask myself, how do I build water resiliency? Okay, and then I would say, well, if I was able to develop that spring, that would develop water resiliency. If I was able to create a series of 4 holding ponds, that would develop water resiliency. And if I was able to increase my rainwater catchment off of our structures, that would build my water resiliency. Okay, that's how you, and then from there you can go, all right, so how do I turn that into a goal? And I can say, well, okay, I'm going to increase rainwater catchment off our roof by the end of May and increase our storage capacity to 3,000 gallons. Okay, why? In order to build water resiliency. Okay, so I just went through the SMART W, which is a great way to go. So themes and milestones, right? Then we get into the next step, which is strategy and tactics, right? Strategy is the big picture. What's my overall strategy? How am I approaching this? Am I going to be someone who develops a varied and diverse homestead with multiple animal systems and perennial crops? Okay, and that's going to be my strategy. Or am I going to develop a homestead with small animal systems and a market garden, you know, with, say, an edible forest garden? Okay, so that's kind of the overall strategy. And then you get into the tactics. Okay, so the tactics would be things like, you know, how you're going to integrate that market garden, or what types of animal systems. Is it going to be a silvopasture or kind of a traditional pasture? All right, one more example here. And again, themes and milestones. Grow nutrient-dense food, right? That's obviously a theme. And that's a strong theme for us. We want to grow nutrient-dense food. We just don't want to grow a lot of calories. We want to grow a lot of varied nutrient-dense food. And then I can look at the milestones in there, and it's like holistic management, animal system, install edible forest garden, increase annual and perennial gardens. Okay, and then I could turn those into SMART goals. Okay, I've talked about this, the strategy and tactics. And again, you know, this is where you get into the kind of the smaller piece where you're designing, say, a garden, and you say, well, I'm gonna do raised bed gardening. Okay, I'm gonna do raised bed gardening inside of a cold climate greenhouse. I'm gonna do row crop gardening and sell to market, right? And I'm gonna look at what are the things that I can value add, right? So now we're getting into tactics, right? So value add is, you know, it's kind of difficult to compete at a farmer's market trying to sell cucumbers and tomatoes. But if you can come up with a really good salsa and am able to sell that direct to consumer, that's probably a better idea. Okay, so you need to come up with your own strategy and tactics. All right, so feedback and measurements. This is really important. Famous quote is, you know, what gets measured gets managed. And there's no different than your 10 acres and a dream. It's no different than homesteading. Okay, a lot of people, I'll see this, and I know the other panelists know this as well, very well, is that we'll see people in the local area selling eggs, for example, and they're selling them at a loss, but they don't know they're selling them at a loss. Okay, and so you have to understand these things, and you need to measure these things. Okay, it's very important to do that. So you figure out ways, how can I get feedback loops in my own system, and how can I measure that system? You know, for us, we like to keep track of the amount of food we're growing. You know, it's important to us to grow a lot of food from our own property. We grow over 50% of all of our own caloric needs from our property. Okay, so we track those things. And let's see, we'll cover that. Feedback and measurements. Okay, there we go. I want to make sure that we leave a little more time for the principles here. And let's see, what are we looking for? How are we doing on time? 11:20. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Dan or Sean, we need probably 5-10 minutes. We need to have time for the panel at the end too.
Okay. All right.
I'm sorry, I went long too.
I will speed it up. Sounds good. Okay, so then we get into, and I'll just show you an example. So here's an example of how you integrate your overall strategic plan, and then you have a conceptual plan, or you might call that an annual plan, and then you have project planning. This is excellent and something that you should develop and learn as a skill. It's very valuable. You'll save money, you'll save time, you'll save heartache, and all of that. Okay, so you have your strategic plan, and then inside of that, you have an annual plan where you get into a little bit more detail. And then each major project that you do, you should come up with a project plan, and that will be very helpful to you. I love this quote. Teddy Roosevelt, do what you can with what you have where you are. The reason I love this quote is because it strips away all of the excuses that we levy on ourselves. Okay, so do what you can. Most of us underestimate what we can do because we don't look for the other resources out there. We don't look to collaborate with other people. Most of us can do more than what we think. Okay, with what you have, most of us also underestimate what we have. You know, maybe you don't have a lot of land, but you have time, or you have money, or maybe you don't have money, but you have time and land. So that other people that you can collaborate with to help you get where you want to go. And where you are, I think we both underestimate and overestimate this at times, right? In a lot of cases, it's, I'm not in a position to do X, Y, or Z, or we are not ready to do something, yet we go do it, okay? For examples, again, I've seen this, unfortunately, dozens of times where people come out here, they buy a piece of land, and they pull their trailer out on it, and they're going to build a house, and they're going to drill a well, and they're going to develop the land and all this. Well, they find out quick, fast, and in a hurry that everything costs more and takes longer. And unfortunately, within a couple of years, a lot of them are gone, or they had to downsize what they were trying to do. So keep that all in context. Okay, we're getting close, and I'm just going to cover just a couple principles for you as food for thought, right? On different ways and how you can approach your 10 acres of dream and homesteading. Okay, so function stacking. This is really important. Multiple functions from each element and multiple elements providing the same function. Another way to say this is redundancy, okay, and multifunctionality. Okay, so multifunctionality and redundancy, all very important principles that you can use. So on the left here, you see a wood cook stove. And on that wood cook stove, you can cook food. Obviously, you can dry herbs above it. You can heat your house. You can make hot water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. On the right side, you see a solar, just a container that's going to collect, or it's going to be able to heat water via solar, right? So example, so you have multiple elements to heat water, and then of course each one of those things can do multiple things. Okay, multiple functions. Here's just a picture of we have a hoop house, and during the season, we grow tomatoes, peppers, and things like that. Even though most of our homestead is perennial, we do grow some annuals. And in the winter, we'll overwinter chickens in it. Okay, so this is another form of function stacking. Simple is resilient. Integrated and synergistic system. Okay, this is how we approach. I go back to the example of tree crops and Corsica. We want to integrate and make our system synergistic. How can we integrate the chickens, the annual garden, and the orchard? We can, and we should. In another example, we run ducks and poultry through our edible forest garden. You want to mimic natural systems. This is always good. I love this picture here. This is the oak savanna in Oregon. Obviously a much different climate than us, but it's beautiful, and it's stable, resilient, and self-sufficient. Okay, and that's what we get when we mimic natural systems. We mimic natural systems, right? Pigs in their natural environment is wooded and forested. It really is. And so we mimic that on our homestead. Catch and store energy and materials, hold useful flows. I love water as an example. I hold water as high in the landscape as possible, but we also do lots of things like rainwater catchment that is used for our gardens, and on and on. Okay, turn waste streams into resources. I think this is the last one. Waste streams into resources. This is excellent, okay? And so this transcends all areas of 10 acres and a dream. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see that's a place that was a forest that was thinned, and then all of the slash piles are kind of piled up. Now, for me, I am wanting to leave as much material within fire safety limitations as possible in that forest. Why? Moisture retention, feeding the microbiology of the soil health, wildlife, and basically all that organic matter eventually is going to break down. And I like to think of it as very, very slow release fertilizer. Okay, but you have to get creative in there, and that's it. Okay, that's it. So you can find us on YouTube, and those are some of the things that we're growing and doing here, depending on the year and the season. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll wait and see. Let's see if we have some questions.
Okay, well, largely due to our time constraints,